What's up, everyone? All right, so in today's episode, I'm going to give you my game plan for the week ahead and my watch list for Monday morning. Now, Monday is going to be the last day for the month of June. Overall, June has been a really strong month, although in the last week, it's been kind of interesting because I've either been green, like $65,000, $70,000, or the day has been totally dead and I've been break even. So it's like one or the other. So I've had break-even day and then $75,000 day. Then break-even day, 65,000. Break-even day, 60,000. So it's just sort of jumping between either we have good opportunities and we have momentum, or we've got nothing. So Friday was a pretty solid green day, up 67,000 to finish the day, down from my peak of 82,000, which was a pretty solid day. And at that point, I thought I had a chance of crossing into six figures, but it kind of fell apart as the stock I was trading became really choppy. But you know, what's interesting is after the open, we had a stock that ended up squeezing up, made a huge move from about $5 a share to $30 a share, but then it sold off completely. In fact, it had 25 red 5-minute candles in a row. So it was just solid red selling for hours. Let's pull up the chart. Let's kind of look at it. So here's the chart from Friday of this one that made this kind of ridiculous move. I mean, this amount of red candles, there was just no bounce. In fact, this is a pattern that we've seen. And, you know, for those of you guys who've been trading for a while, we would generally look at a chart like this. And if you said, Ross, what's something you would guess about this? I would say it's a Chinese company, China stock, because this tends to be something that happens with Chinese companies. And so one thing that you have to kind of recognize is that a lot of these companies that are on the US market that are foreign companies, while on the one hand, you would think that they're going to face the same regulatory requirements that any other NASDAQ listed company will face. That's true, but then there's also this sort of caveat. Now, I can't speak specifically to this company other than that it's Chinese. I don't know this company well at all. It's a fairly recently listed stock that has now twice made a big pop and then sold off the entire move. But with other Chinese companies I've seen in the past, what I've seen happen is companies will get listed on the exchange and they'll have financials and they'll make those financials public through their quarterly and annual filings, and they're audited. However, the auditors are not US based auditors that are, you know, above board and kind of required to adhere to certain standards. So if you have a foreign company that has foreign auditors, then all of a sudden you sort of have to question this whole system. You know, does the company itself, I mean, is it even all real? And we've seen instances where there have been companies that were foreign that got listed on the market and they were a total shell. They didn't actually have any real operations. So essentially, they were a company where the insiders who created the company were owning shares at basically zero. So they essentially they incorporate a company and they give themselves 10 million shares or whatever it is, just 10 million shares on a certificate, and those are their shares. And then they have all these financials, the company starts trading, and then what we've seen are these WhatsApp scams where WhatsApp scammers will pump up the stock, pushing it higher, and then the insiders will dump. And we've even seen instances where these companies will initially list on the exchange with like 10 million shares, but then covertly they will issue another 100 million shares. And so you think the float's 10 million, but it's actually like 110 million. And so the insiders get more shares and they can just keep dumping. So when you see this like infinite selling, it kind of makes you think that there's like a glitch in the system. And in some instances, there kind of is. So again, I'm not saying that specifically for this company, but when I see a stock with this type of drop, it just concerns me. So look, we know that trading Chinese stocks can be risky. We also know that there's a risk to reward sort of calculation that we have to do. And I saw, well, I think Danny, who's in the chat room, is a Warrior Pro member with his verified profitability badge. He said he had his biggest green day personal record ever on Friday, thanks to trading WFF. I think he was up like 41,000 or something like that, which is fantastic. So look, there was momentum, there was volatility, and there was opportunity in this. This thing went from $5 a share to $30. So on the one hand, shorts who are like, it's a China stock, this thing might end up doing a 100% or a 90% drop, they may be correct about that. And eventually it did. But if you start shorting it too soon and you get on the wrong side of it, then all of a sudden, you could be in a real jam as this thing starts pulling away. And that's exactly what ended up happening here. So, my attitude with these types of stocks in general is that while I acknowledge that they're risky and generally, feel like I have to be cautious when I'm trading them, I also recognize that there's opportunity. And so I might have considered trading this, but right now I'm traveling, I'm in Europe, and this happened later in the day. So it was like 6 o'clock at night in the evening here. So I was already done for the day when this all happened. So I didn't end up trading this. But nonetheless, it kind of is the first thing I wanted to cover here today because it was just sort of the last big move on Friday and, just sort of leaves you wondering a little bit. So Friday, we also had LCFY. And LCFY is the stock that I traded in the morning and did, pretty well on. Had this squeeze here from $2 to $14 a share. It's pretty impressive, but ended up selling off kind of hard here, kind of rallying back up and then selling off a bit more. And one thing that I noticed is that this stock, after the opening bell, became particularly choppy. And so something that I've noticed with some of these stocks, especially when they get higher priced, is they start having much bigger spreads. And then after the opening bell, you have a lot of traders using market orders, and the market makers profit from having a bigger spread. And so it seems like there's some algorithms that run after the 9:30 open that are keeping the spreads a lot bigger than what we typically would see during pre-market trading, which is kind of interesting. It's almost surprising because in spite of higher volume, you actually have bigger spreads, which typically a bigger spread is indicative of low liquidity and lighter volume, unless there's an algorithm kind of behind the scenes keeping the spreads bigger. And then that's kind of what I suspect is happening because it doesn't make sense. There's no logical reason why the spreads would be bigger with heightened volume at the open. So in any case, LCFY was great pre-market, and then the bell rang, and unfortunately, it became quite choppy. Now, just as kind of like a side note, over here in my Warrior Pro classes, this is way down on slide like 1284. But I have this whole section where I talk about the phenomenon of these Chinese stocks that just basically have these huge days where in one day they just drop. And again, if you own the stock at 1 cent, essentially, then who cares? I mean, you could just sell it you want to get more for it, but also I feel like maybe they just don't even care. So yeah, like a drop like that is just so bad. All right. So nonetheless, will we see more momentum in Chinese names? We might. On the one hand, short sellers should probably exercise caution when you think about shorting one that first pops up, because they can be irrationally strong. When these things are going up, they can make insane moves. Obviously, we saw RGC, which had a reverse split, but effectively went from 50 cents a share to $90 a share, adjusted for the split. So if you short something like that, your downside risk is a lot higher than your upside. But, if you start buying these too extended and you're not good at cutting your losses, you can also face a lot of risk. So at the end of the day, whether you're long or short, you just got to cut your losses. And so Chinese stocks can present opportunities. And I wonder if we're going to see more of that, this coming week after this big move on WFF. I don't know. I'm not sure. It ended up finishing the day down 40%. That's a huge swing. So at one point it was up 400%. And then versus the open, it ended up going down 40%. So, that's pretty crazy. All right. So I'm not watching it on Monday. Will some people consider doing a bounce on it? Yes. But remember, if there's insiders that own the share at, own it at 1 cent a share, then they'll be still happy to sell at $4. And you might see, so I just don't think it's worth it. Okay, LCFY, is that something I would consider for Monday? No, not really. It pulled back a little bit too much. So at least not for like 4 a.m., like a trade like right kind of out of the starting gate, so to speak. However, I guess I would say that there are some pivots that we should probably look at. So pivot number 1, 987. And the pivot is this sort of previous area right here where it had a little bit of resistance. If it could break over that level, that starts to look interesting. The next pivot would be back up here. Oops, not there. Sorry, undo. The next pivot would be right up here. And then that basically gets us back to 14. But I just suspect that day 2 continuation wouldn't be as clean. Even day 1 was a little tricky. CYN, by the way, was another stock that I found to be, really difficult to trade. Multiple offerings. Some stocks are just easier than others, and CYN was very difficult, and LCFY was not as easy as some of the others I've seen. So I'd kind of prefer to wait for something fresh. Okay, so now if we go to, sorry, my hand's on the right click instead of the left. All right, so let's see. I'm going to pull up a couple different scans here. We're going to look at the recent reverse split scan. We're going to look at after hours top gainer scanner. We're going to look at recent IPO top moving scanner. I think those will be good. All right, so then I'm going to link these up here. Link this up. So when I'm building my watch list, and actually I'll pull up one more. I'm going to pull up the continuation scanner. Okay, so there's a couple things that I look for when I'm thinking about, creating a watch list for the next day, whether it's a Sunday or it's any other day. And the first is at thinking about what were the big movers from the previous day, and is there a theme? So LCFY, okay, and WFF, okay, all right. So is there a theme there? Not exactly between the two, other than low float, small cap stock making a huge move. So, okay, continue to look for low float, small cap stocks. We have seen recent reverse splits and recent IPOs perform pretty well. So I'm going to start by just looking at the recent IPO scan, and rather than look at the 2-week, I'm just going to sort by the lower float ones first. Now this one, HCHL, I'd have to go check the filings to see how big the float is. Looking at the chart, I can see that the high was back here at 725. What often happens with these IPOs is that they get listed and then they drop in price a little bit before rallying. So it wouldn't surprise me to see this pull back a little bit more. Now, the number of shares offered were 1.1 million. So it's a pretty low float IPO. This is here on the NASDAQ calendar. All right, so it's a 1 million share IPO. This one, if they come out with news, could probably put in a big move, and the level to watch is 725 because above that level is blue sky. So, of course, blue sky is something we would pay attention to. Blue sky being all-time highs, no resistance. And it's only had a total of like 5 million shares of volume ever, total. So that's pretty good. And it's a US, has a US address. But let me just see now. Sometimes US addresses can be a little bit misleading. Yeah. See this? See, this is where they get you. I was gonna say Happy City Holdings. Just something about that sound a little. So it's an all-you-can-eat hotspot restaurant operator in Hong Kong. Okay. All right. So that's what we're working with. So just, FYI. Um, so yeah, just okay. So just want to kind of, keep in the back of your mind. If you see it hitting the scanners, you'll know that while they might have a US address, it's actually a Chinese company and it's a recent IPO and a low float. Could make a big move, but make sure you cut your losses quickly, both long and short. PNTM, 3 million share float. It's been rallying a bit since the IPO. Hong Kong company as well, right there. You could see that HK. All-time high is 8, so possible continuation. I wouldn't trade it I don't think I would trade it, at least if it didn't have news. I would trade it if it started moving quickly, but I don't expect it'll move quickly if it doesn't have news. JEM, another Hong Kong IPO. So, we could be kind of in a position where we could see we've got 3 low float Hong Kong IPOs, Chinese IPOs. We could get a little cycle on that, a little theme there. WFF, this one, not quite as recent, but goes back, not too far. So there's something to be aware of. And then, although the floats on some of these are starting to get a little higher, I don't necessarily have a huge problem with that because if it's a U.S. company, then we're going to expect they're going to adhere to a little bit of a maybe more formal set of maybe formalities when it comes to IPOs, which would be that insiders can't sell for a lockout period. So we won't probably have as much selling for 90 days. But you have to look at the filings of each company to just be sure of that. Okay, so I've got the recent IPO scan going. And then this just helps me if I see a stock that pops up, now I'm already slightly familiar with it. Okay, now let's do the same thing on the recent reverse split, and we'll sort this by float. Some of these may have already popped up since the split, but SHPH, for instance, has not. So if this one comes out with news, Shuttle Pharmaceutical, U.S. pharmaceutical company, recent reverse split. TRUG, this one, True Golf Holdings. What is True Golf? Let's see. The forefront of indoor golf innovation for over 40 years. Okay. That's a little bit of a hard sector to get excited about, to be honest. Pharmaceutical, you could see them putting out a news headline and this type of stock popping up. True Golf, I don't know. APDN, back to a pharmaceutical. This, however, is a company that does have a history of popping up and selling off. They've done a number of splits. So you kind of have to figure if it does pop up, it's short-lived before a possible secondary offering. CERO, this one did pop up after the split, so we wouldn't probably consider it now for a while. XXII, pretty light on volume. So this was on the watch list last week. It'll stay on the watch list. Just if it has news, pay attention to it. Mullen, now this one I wouldn't consider. It's just too terrible of an offender, reverse split, and just dropping. ONCO, this one, if it has news. GCTK, so you can see these are all very, very low float stocks. So you could find some really, interesting charts here. But at the end of the day, these really need a news catalyst to get them going, typically. So until they have that headline, they're just sort of on the side chart, but something to, be aware of. So you can actually run this scan during the day and you can just have it on change from close. And that way, if you see a stock starting to move up this list, you already know it's a recent reverse split. So then you could sort of be like, ooh, is this something I should pay attention to? When it comes to after hours top gainers scanners, Viru popped up. This one might get a little bit more momentum going into Monday morning, but probably by the time 7 a.m. comes around, I don't know, there might be something better. The 200 moving average is around 440, so it's kind of close. Would need to break over that level. Reverse split a while ago, long enough ago that it's already popped up several times following the split. So not in love with that. GDHG, a little cheaper. YJ, no interest really there. So nothing really from after hours Friday. And then continuation scan, IN. This one continues to push a bit higher. I did lose on it one day last week, but the 200 moving average is up here around $18 a share. So it has a bit more room to that level, but that would be probably resistance. I don't think I'll trade it up in this area. NKTR floats a little higher on a couple of these. Live, this is an interesting one. It's had a history of making big moves, but the price is a little higher. Probably leave that alone. ASTI, a little cheaper, but it does keep pushing higher. So while we have a couple of stocks that are going to be side chart, the focus on Monday morning will be looking at this top gainer scanner right here to see what has news and what's leading momentum in the market. And, if it's LCFY, then that's the stock I'm going to be pulling up and looking for trades on. Whatever it is, whatever's on the scanner is what I'm going to pay close attention to. But if I see one of these stocks are kind of on my, kind of side chart watch list popping up, then I'm going to be very quick to, I've already done a little bit of due diligence. I sort of already understand, it's a recent reverse split, it's a recent IPO. This is something I should pay extra close attention to. So, you could just kind of write down the names of a couple of these tickers that are sort of want to keep them fresh in your mind in case they do have news. You can make a watch list, of course, in a digital format also, however you want is fine. But having a couple that you're familiar with that have, I guess some potential of giving us a big move. There was actually one, I can't remember, it was on the watch list on, if it was this last week or the week before, but it ended up that stock did come out with breaking news. It was on Monday or Tuesday, and it was like, it was kind of right off the watch list, although it was just, I said it needs news, but if it has news, it's something to pay attention to. And then all of a sudden, boom, it had news, which was somewhat predictable that it would, especially in the case of reverse splits, because these companies want, investors to take interest and take note of, the stock price and that the shares are, maybe priced more normally. It's not a penny stock anymore. And hopefully it, attracts some buyers. So we very frequently see a cycle of reverse split, breaking news, stock squeezes up, and then, maybe after a few days or a week or whatever, an offering. Another headline I would certainly pay attention to would be a private placement. We did have some offerings last week, and those hurt share price because it dilutes the value of the company. But when you have a stock or a company that puts out news of a private placement, that's a little different because now they've received money from an usually institution, and we sort of think that institution has done some degree of due diligence on the company, feels good enough to give them a pretty big check, and that significantly reduces the risk of a secondary offering. So after you have a private placement catalyst, we can see a really big move. So that's something that I will keep paying attention to as always. If we have a stock where the news is that they got a $30 million private placement, then now I'm thinking, okay, not only is this going up, I don't have to worry about an offering like today or tomorrow. They just got 30 million bucks or whatever the case is. The only exception is that the private placements where the company is directed to use all that money to buy a cryptocurrency, those are a little bit trickier. So they worked, but I'm not really trusting that headline at this point anymore. It's kind of over. So with that, you've got a game plan for the week ahead, a watch list for Monday. So Monday, last day of June, just going to try to finish off, the month with another decent day. And then next thing you know, we're rolling into July, and I've got my, aggressive goals for the month of July. I'm going to trade aggressively when we see good opportunities. And for those of you guys that want to watch over my shoulder while I'm trading, I'll put the link in the description of this episode and also pin it to the top comment where you can do a 2-week trial for $20. It's a 2-week trial for $20. And by the way, this week we will also have our 4th of July sales going on. So if any of you are ready to take the leap and become a full-fledged Warrior Pro member or a Warrior Starter member, we'd love to have you, and you can take advantage of the 4th of July special discounts. So check those out, and I will see you guys live streaming tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for members at Warrior Trading. Reminder, as always, trading is risky, so manage your risk, take it slow, and practice in a simulator before putting real money on the line.